Have you ever had the experience of being pulled in multiple directions? Feeling like a part of you wants to go one way and cater to one aspect of your life, while another part of you feels pulled in a totally different direction? Perhaps between your own emotional connection to your friends, family, romantic partner versus your own personal growth and not knowing how to prioritize. Or maybe you love novelty on one hand, but also kind of crave stability and security and don't know how to prioritize this push pull dynamic in your life. Well, if this is something you've experienced and you're not sure about your needs or the hierarchy of your needs or how to prioritize your needs, in today's full length webinar that I'll be sharing with you, we are going to talk about how to recognize your needs and how to understand competing needs in relationship dynamics. So stay tuned. I'm really excited that you're here, and I can't wait to share this with you straight from inside the Personal Development School. Also, if you're new here, my name is Thais. Welcome to the Personal Development School YouTube channel. This is the channel where I put daily content out on YouTube all about the subconscious mind, attachment styles, and healing the relationship to ourselves and others in our lives. I really hope you enjoy this today, and let me know any questions you have or comments you have down below. So today we are going to talk about competing needs. I'm actually so excited to talk about this as a whole because I think there's a lot that we can really dig into here. So we're going to talk about competing needs. We're going to talk about what are our needs, how do they form, how do they affect us, and we're going to do a deep dive into some strategies that we can really implement when it comes to change as it relates to our competing needs. So I know everybody likes slides, so I put some slides here together today, especially because this is like a pretty big topic. We're going to start just by reviewing needs as a whole. I know for some of you, you know your needs very, very well. I know for myself, I can easily fall into this sort of trap of being like, I know my needs so well. And then like a year passes and I'm like, oh, I should actually revisit my needs because it's been a year and humans change and I've changed. So it can be really valuable to do a bit of a review when it comes to needs. But I want us to just deeply understand needs and how they're working so that we can then dig into how competing needs can affect us and what we can really do. So I'll share my screen. We're going to just start by reviewing personality needs as a whole. And if you are not familiar, our personality needs are probably one of the most important things you can get right in PDS. Like, if there's some things that are really going to make an impact, it is knowing how to reprogram your subconscious mind, knowing how to find your core wounds and limiting beliefs, knowing your needs, and then being able to communicate them, do some emotional regulation work, nervous system stuff. I mean, these are all in a top, like, sort of tier of things that are going to make a huge impact on your life. So, you can think of your personality needs as basically being your subconscious drivers of life. Every single person has personality needs and they are affecting you whether you are aware of them or not. And once you are aware of them, it will make everything a lot easier to understand. It will make things where you're like, why did I make that decision? Or why did I do that thing? It will make it much more clear. And at least I can speak from my own experience. I found that when I know my personality needs, I know how to design my life in a way that's more likely to have less resistance. I'm more likely to be excited to wake up every day for life and enjoy truly what I'm doing. So, you can think of your subconscious needs as being these drivers that are always in action. And in fact, every single thing that we do is a subconscious strategy to get our basic needs met. Our personality needs met, which really relate back to our basic needs, anyways. So, when we talk about the basic needs, the six basic human needs are really deeply subconscious. We could even make the argument they are almost unconscious. And essentially, how our needs form as human beings is that we have six basic human needs that are driving us all the time. Okay. And these are really, really deep. I usually spend less time on the six basic needs because they're harder to recognize, right? Like, because they're so deeply subconscious. Like, let's say one of the basic needs you'll see is significance. Um, Sometimes somebody might have a significance need and maybe they're trying to get their significance need met by getting attention or approval or by having power over other people in like an unhealthy way. And it's easy for somebody who's, let's say, like power hungry to recognize they love power, but it's harder for that person to be like, oh, that's because I have a basic need of significance. So it's sometimes harder to identify these more unconscious or deeply subconscious components of self. But with our subconscious, like if, if you've been in PDS for a while, one of the key differences between the conscious, subconscious, and unconscious is that the subconscious mind is information that is just below our conscious mind, right? We are able to dig in there, we're able to reflect, we're able to notice things and actually retrieve that information. It's kind of in like our peripheral awareness. Our unconscious mind is where it is very difficult to retrieve information. So we sort of have like this space between our sub and unconscious where those six basic needs exist, right? So those six basic needs can affect us, but really we can work with the subconscious personality needs. So that's where we're really gonna spend a lot of our time today. Now, when we look, let's say, if you're familiar with the six basic needs, that one of them is love and connection. So, somebody may have a really high social need and they might love, social time with people or community, but they may not realize, like, for them, that's actually about love and connection. That's a little easier to recognize than like the power component being related to significance, but some things can really be out of our awareness. So, you can think of essentially as we have these basic needs, okay? These basic needs that we're wired for. And within those six basic human needs that we literally come into this world biologically wired on behalf of, um, these six basic human needs, we find different strategies to get them met. And wherever we find a need to be positive, and we find simultaneously that need to be lacking, our subconscious mind will basically go into overdrive to try to fulfill that. So let me just give you a few core examples. We'll use the basic need of love and connection. If you look at a anxiously attached person, what do they have? Well, they have positive feelings, positive emotional associations to love and connection because they have loving caregivers, right? But they have inconsistency around it. Sometimes the caregivers work a lot. Sometimes they are busy and can't be there as much as the child needs. And so there's these needs that the anxious person sees as positive, but they see them as constantly being taken away. So now the subconscious mind has positive emotional associations to love and connection, but sees a void of it. And wherever we see something as being positive and having a void, the subconscious mind goes in overdrive trying to fulfill it. So we'll see the anxiously attached person grows up and they constantly want to fill their love and connection bucket, whether that be through friendships, family relationships, social connection, emotional connection. They're trying to take it all in, right? Let's juxtapose that next to the dismissive avoidant attachment style. What do we have for the dismissive avoidant? Well, dismissive avoidants often have a pretty pervasive degree of negative feelings towards connection. Not exclusively negative feelings, but especially towards like deeper connection, really yearning for that connection, there's sometimes some pretty negative stuff. So, what will happen is the need for love and connection will have more negative emotional associations tied to it than you would see, for example, with the anxiously attached person. It doesn't mean the DA sees all negative things tied to connection. It just means if we were to look at the ratio of positive to negative, we would see the anxious sees love and connection as much more exclusively positive, and dismissive avoidance are somewhere sort of in the middle there. Okay. So, what's going to happen is the basic need for love and connection will not be as much of a priority for the average dismissive avoidant. And the next part that we'll see is that the ways in which the dismissive avoidant will tend to value or try to get its needs met for love and connection will usually be based on things that also don't touch the dismissive avoidance core wounds. In other words, if you look at dismissive avoidance, they generally try to get their basic need met for love and connection through things like social connection, community, friendship, right? These things that are not requiring as much vulnerability. Okay. Whereas for an anxious preoccupied, you'll see that they want that deeper emotional connection. They want real closeness with people. So essentially, this is what creates the programming for our personality needs. Okay. We have these basic needs that we're wired for around love and connection, around growth, around significance, around certainty, uncertainty, these sorts of things. We come into the world with these basic needs, and our subconscious mind finds strategies that are essentially preferable for how to get those basic needs met. Okay. Based on the way it gets programmed to think about those needs. Okay. So if being vulnerable doesn't feel so good for dismissive avoidance, they're going to choose less vulnerable ways of getting their needs met. If more vulnerability, closer connection feels better for an anxious preoccupied, they're going to choose those more direct forms. And you'll actually see this take place across all of these different basic needs that we have. So I sort of like to think as an analogy of like this big body of water being our basic needs, that sometimes that big body of water is really deep and hard to sort of like understand, because it's deeply unconscious. We may not see it as easily. But these streams leading back into the river really become those personality needs. Okay. When we can understand our personality needs, we are really empowered in our lives to design our lives and create systems and strategies to get these needs met that will make us feel much more fulfilled. We're going to talk about all of that in just a moment. I just want to give another example. So let's say that you are somebody with the basic need of significance. Okay, so you've got this basic need of significance as a human being, and with that basic human need of significance, let's say that you are in a position where you don't have any kind of healthy environment. Everything around you is unhealthy. Everything around you is a power struggle. Maybe you have, parents who are very unhealthy themselves, or you grew up in a really, really tumultuous environment. For you, significance might come from a feeling of like, wow, I'm sick and tired of feeling so powerless to this terrible environment. The only thing that gives me a sense of significance is to have power over other people. And then I feel like I'm taking my power back. And then I feel like I'm getting power over other people. Whereas somebody else that grows up in a really healthy environment might feel like what makes them feel significant is to be seen and heard by the people they love, right? So, or, if somebody grows up in an environment where they feel like they put their parents on a huge pedestal and they're really worried about not having their parents' love and approval, it might be that the approval from the people they love is what makes them feel significant. So, how we come to get that basic need met for significance will very much be determined by the type of programming in regards to the types of strategies we see as being most positive versus negative according to our programming within that environment. Okay. Hopefully that makes sense because it's kind of like a mind warping thing. But when you can start seeing this, it's a lot easier. We'll just do one more just for I feel like the more examples we have, the easier it becomes. So like let's just look at the basic human need for security. Okay. So or certainty, right? So for some people, what gets their needs met for certainty, let's say, for example, a dismissive avoidant might be to have a sense of security, right? To have things be stable, consistent, void of conflict, right? So this might be how they really get their needs met for security or for certainty. And if we look at instead a fearful avoidant who is like not used to things being stable or consistent much at all, they may get their need met for certainty more through having a sense of control. Okay. When I control everything, I have a sense of certainty. And so you'll see a lot of fearful avoidants try to be very controlling of themselves sometimes in their lives, or controlling of how they spend their time or what they're doing, or, how they're structuring things. Whereas for a dismissive avoidant, they try to get their need met for certainty through having a lot of security, stability, peace, right? These sorts of things. So, you'll see these differences based on how we get conditioned in our environment for what we think is possible, what we see as being more positive or productive. These things are really going to determine the output of what our personality needs become. Okay. So, since we have a lot more conscious awareness and essentially control over our personality needs, we are going to spend the most time here. I sort of explained this all already, but this sort of summarizes it. First of all, your brain is a subconscious needs meeting machine. It is always going to find a way to get your needs met. And it is always trying to make every decision it can all day long to get its needs met. Every single thing we do throughout the day is a subconscious strategy to get our needs met, but also based on our beliefs. Okay, we're going to talk about that later. This is going to be like a little more of an advanced webinar here today. So what happens is when we get into these strategies for how to get our needs met, because at a deep level, our needs are our sense of self. Whenever our personality needs feel threatened, we personally feel very threatened. Okay. So if you've ever had the experience of like, if somebody's going to take your personal growth away, that might make you feel very, very threatened. If somebody's going to take your freedom away and you're a big freedom lover, that make you feel very, very threatened, right? Where like we might fight in that kind of space, right? Fight for our needs in some sort of way. If you've ever been in a position where somebody's going to say something negative about your family, if you have a big personality need centered around family, that might be where your frustration comes in. Like we take things very personally because we deeply identify with our sense of self as it essentially being through the filter of our needs. So these things can feel very, very meaningful to us. I mean, you can see really unhealthy people in society, right? Presently in history, whatever you want to think of it as, but where people have a huge need for power and they're going to do whatever they can for power. And it's like not rational. It doesn't make sense. It's not realistic. But if that's become a survival strategy to them because that's their sense of self, then we're going to see irrational patterns of behavior. I mean, you can see as well if somebody has a huge need around romantic relationships as a personality need and the romantic relationship gets threatened, they may do things that also don't make sense from a conscious mind perspective because it's your subconscious trying to survive by making sure it really latches onto these needs. So when we think of these different dynamics, these needs are deeply driving us. They're driving our decisions, they're driving our emotions, they're driving so many aspects of our lives. And whatever we see as being positive from our six basic needs and we see a void, that's where we're going into overdrive. Okay. So if you saw, like, I'll share one for me, and I've seen this shift around for me in the past like year or two. But as a child, I had a very controlling parent, who was very, very intense. And so I felt really trapped and I saw freedom as like a really good thing. So for a very long part of my life, freedom was one of my highest needs. And however I could create freedom was so important. And then when I got enough freedom, I was like, okay, that kind of went down the needs list. And then over time, sometimes that pops back up, right? When I don't like things that are happening in the Canadian government, for example, that need shifts a little bit back up. So, things can shift around based on when you see more voids. And generally, your personality needs are going to be somewhat consistent across life, especially if you picked up needs very early. Okay. I'm going to really dig into this for a minute. You are going to have personality needs that change. I did not grow up as a person with a high personal growth need. When I learned about personal growth, it was like all I could eat, live, breathe, sleep, drink, you name it, like just, needed personal growth. Eventually, sometimes if we go really, really deeply into our needs, um, those things, when we really fulfill them, when we really fill them for a long period of time, they may drop a little down our personality needs list. Okay. So for me, personal growth was the highest, but I spent all day, every day, eat, living, breathing that for a long time. It's still there in the top 5. It went down a couple of spots because I spent a lot of time fulfilling that. So you'll see things sort of shift around. For me, freedom wasn't even a big one for a while. And then, that kind of dropped out of the top 5. Maybe it was sitting around 6 or 7. And eventually it came back up into the top 5, right? But that was a very sensitive one for me for it to shift around because one of my deepest voids as a child at a deep unconscious level was a lack of freedom. That was one of my first maybe wounds that I might have experienced. So we can see these shifts that'll happen where you're going to have like sort of this, in a way, you can think of it not as a genetic predisposition because it's not that, but almost as like an early programming predisposition. Like, the things that are going to impact you the most happen in the first 3 years of your life. So, the deep needs that you develop in those first few years are going to be really important. Another one for me as a person, emotional connection has always been a really, really big one. That's always sitting somewhere in the top 5, kind of bopping around in the top, usually 3 or 4 spots. So you'll see that your needs shift a little bit over time. You could have new needs that come online, and the priority and hierarchy of your needs will matter to a pretty decent degree. Okay. But um, it's important to check in with your needs regularly because as they shift, what you prioritize subconsciously will shift. And also, it is important to realize that the things that really impact you at an early age will likely stick with you to varying degrees throughout life. Okay. So hopefully that sort of makes you understand the how the personality needs really deeply come about. So how do they actually affect us? Well, I like to think of our personality needs as being these coordinates of our authentic self. And I always use this analogy because this is literally what it reminds me of. Is if you've ever use a GPS. If you're like me and you're terrible with directions and need a GPS for everything, then what you'll see is whenever you miss an exit, the GPS like redirects you immediately. It's like you missed your turn, rerouting, and it gives you like a new route to take. And I think of like our personality needs as being like that. If you're not getting something met, your subconscious mind will start sabotaging what's in front of you to get you back on track on the route to making sure you're getting those needs met as quickly as possible. Okay. A really classic and very easy to understand example of this is because your brain is really designed to get its needs met quite quickly. Um, it will often get your needs met in the fastest way possible, which is sometimes not the most effective way. In other words, I've had a lot of clients over the years who've had the discussion of, and I've done this when I was a fearful avoidant for sure. I noticed this. But there's a dynamic of if you're feeling emotionally disconnected from your partner, well, maybe you pick a fight because what's happening is when you're picking a fight or a little argument or bickering, both people are emotionally connected, right? They're emotionally there and present and feeling all their feelings together. And so, there can be these subconscious strategies that we use to get our needs met where we're like, why do we do this? Or like, I know consciously this is not productive, but your subconscious mind is really the one running the show. So this is where it becomes problematic, perhaps. And when you look at it this way, because your subconscious mind is deeply motivated to get its needs met in the fastest way possible, you may see things like you sabotage what's in front of you. I can remember being in university and having a huge need for emotional connection and sitting down to try to study and being like, I'm not studying. I feel frustrated. I don't want to be here. And wanting to jump on social media or text friends or make phone calls or do things. And what's happening is my conscious mind is like, sit down and study. And my subconscious mind is like, you don't have your emotional connection needs met right now. Studying is not one of our needs that's showing up. And so instead, I'm going to sabotage what you're sitting down to do so that I can get you back on track, get you back on the route of getting your emotional connection needs met. So when we feel a lot of that like friction, a lot of times we are setting a conscious goal, whether it's a New Year's resolution, a personal goal, whatever it might be. And that conscious goal is just out of alignment with our subconscious needs. And so this is where we're more likely to feel like we're failing or we're stuck. Or the sort of analogy I like to think of is like you're putting the gas and the brakes on at the same time. Like your conscious mind's like, go, 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 full steam ahead, sit down, study, do what you promised yourself. And your subconscious mind is like, absolutely not. It's just hitting the brakes and it can feel very frustrating. And once we start understanding our personality needs, we can start really designing our lives, not just in terms of like what we want to do or how we want to spend our time, but like actually in our habits that we create so that we are getting our needs met directly and proactively, which then takes a lot of the resistance out of our lives. An enormous amount of resistance goes away when we're in a really strong place that way. Okay. So as we continue on, our personality needs are essentially these subconscious programs that are driving your behavior, your emotions, your desires, your thoughts. And as I mentioned earlier, every single choice that we make is essentially a subconscious strategy to get our needs met. And your subconscious mind isn't your conscious mind. Okay. Your conscious mind is capable of logic and rationale and reasoning. And so your subconscious mind is capable of literally going, oh, this does not make sense, right? This bickering to try to get my needs met for emotional connection, there must be a better way than this. But your subconscious is not the part of the mind that reasons. Your subconscious is the part of the mind that has habits and is based on trying to get its needs met out of survival. And so, when we don't have better strategies programmed, we may resort to sometimes destructive things as ways of getting our needs met. And it can be really empowering to start recognizing those things so we can start creating shifts and changes. So when we don't have this conscious awareness, we may what's the word? Resort, resort to old, outdated strategies to get our needs met instead. So I use this example all the time. Like if as a child, when you needed significance, if your way of getting significance was to throw a temper tantrum so you would get seen and heard and get attention, maybe as an adult, when you're not getting your needs met, you also have a temper tantrum just in the adult form, right? You might yell or raise your voice or wave your hands or, throw a fit or whatever it is as this subconscious strategy to get those needs met again. So, we can have these dynamics at play where it's like when our conscious mind might be like, oh, that's destructive. That doesn't do well for me after the fact. But in the moment, your subconscious is like, we're getting the needs met. We're doing it fast. We're doing it right now. Here's what we're gonna go with. So we basically build these positive emotional associations to things that work for us in childhood, and they also become the programmed features that we use to get our needs met as a whole. Meaning, you wouldn't be the person having a temper tantrum if you weren't already programmed with more positive than negative emotional associations about doing that very thing. As an example, if you throw a temper tantrum as a child and your parents ignore you more, then you're not going to build positive emotional associations because it doesn't get your needs met to be seen and heard and get attention. And I'm not saying that that's what parents should do either, because obviously we want like approach oriented behaviors to create secure attachment. But just for the sake of the example, um, if a child is doing that and it's not getting their needs met, they won't build positive emotional associations. It's not being positively reinforced. There isn't positive conditioning that will take place. But instead, if there are these positive emotional associations because you throw a temper tantrum, your parents are like, oh, honey, what's wrong? It's okay. They give you attention. You're actually building this like positive feedback loop and it's going to wire in, okay, this is the behavior I should use. Once you have that wiring, it's going to be your wiring unless you go in and reprogram it. Meaning, this is where we'll see these things as adults all this time later, where you're like, why did that person react that way in the boardroom meeting? That was so irrational. Well, it's probably their programming. They didn't feel seen and heard in the boardroom meeting. They threw the adult version of a temper tantrum. So we can start to understand our conditioning through these needs. Now, there's some other really important things to note. The reticular activating system, or RAS, it's sort of like the filtering system of your mind. Your reticular activating system is always working on behalf of your personality needs. In other words, if you are, walking with your friend and you're going, for a walk through your neighborhood, and you have one of your biggest personality needs is romantic relationships, and your friend's biggest personality needs are around materialism or fashion, you're going to be walking and you're going to notice the couple holding hands, and you're probably going to be analyzing the couple and what they're doing. And your friend is probably going to be analyzing what they're wearing and how that looks and where they got their clothes from. And so our RAS is constantly filtering out information according to essentially these subconscious priorities that are driving us all the time. And they also have to do with how we judge ourselves and our environment. So if you're in a position, for example, where I always give this example because I've seen this with clients. Let's say that you take two women, they're in their 50s, and one woman from a very young age knew she wanted to be a stay-at-home mom and couldn't wait to have a family. And the other woman from a very young age was like, I never want a family. I just want to have a really great career and be really independent and free. Well, you could take these two women, and at 50 years old, they could sit down for lunch together and talk to each other about their lives, and they could in reality both be very happy in each of their systems of needs. One could be really happy with their freedom, made all this progress with their career. The other one has a beautiful family life, so fulfilled by their family life. And they could sit down together, have lunch, and the one who's the career lady might look at the stay-at-home mom and be like, oh, you didn't work. Oh my gosh, she must be so unfulfilled. And then the family lady might look at the career lady and go, oh my gosh, you don't have a family. That's so sad. That's so tragic. And in reality, they could be both completely happy in their own system of needs, but we judge each other and ourselves and our environment through the system of our needs. They really act as like a filtering system. It's like the lens you'll see the world through in a sense. And so it's also very valuable. I've had a lot of discussions with clients over the years where we would do their needs, and I would see things. I remember this one lovely, lovely client. She was just like one of the sweetest, most good-hearted people. And her top needs were spiritual growth, social connection, romantic relationships, um, uh, service to others. It was like she was very like contribution oriented, which is one of the other basic human needs. And her a lot of her family, she had a pretty large family, and a lot of her family was very oriented towards like achievement, financial freedom, wealth building, a lot of these sorts of things. And she kept judging herself. She was like, I'm not as successful as my family. I'm not as successful as my family. And she wasn't like unsuccessful. She had a good stable job. She had like a nice career. And what I had to get her to do is be like, yeah, but your success is going to be where you're valuing success the most, which is going to be where your personality needs are. And so then we said, okay, let's, instead of comparing yourself to the careers of people who are just driven for achievement 24/7 around the clock, let's actually look at where you're successful. And I remember she felt so relieved because she looked and she was like, oh my goodness, I'm successful in my relationship to God and to spirituality. I'm successful in my community. I'm so successful in my friendships and the way I show up for other people and how that like fills my heart. And she was like going on and realized she was very successful in the places that she had the biggest emphasis on, right? Because these were her personality needs. This was her programming. And she got to just shed this comparison of herself, comparing herself to somebody with different programs. So it can be really valuable to recognize that. And then, another really important thing is this blueprint of our personality needs is going to be reflected in how we already show up. Okay. I've had a lot of people come in and say, Thais, I want to make more money. And then we look at their personality needs and nothing's there. It's all about social time or it can be like comfort or things that are not really going to be relevant to making more money, right? So there's ways we can work with this once we know what our individual blueprint is of our needs themselves. So there's still some other ways that they affect us. We're more present when we're more aligned with our personality needs. I'm going to tell you right now, if I was sitting here giving a lecture about accounting or math, I would be like, get me out of here. I'd be like analyzing everyone's faces, trying to find my human behavior connection, or emotional connection to people. So the things that we are really interested in and care about, a lot of the things for me that I'm very aligned with are here, right? Like I get to emotionally connect with people and learn and there's a huge element of personal growth or personal development, human behavior. So we tend to be more present and actually more confident. And I don't mean confident like arrogant, not like overconfident where we're like, oh, look at how great so and so is, or we're not like overinflated. Confident in the sense of like absence of negative internal dialogue when you're in your personality needs. You'll see it. It's so funny. I have this dear friend, and this is a friend I've been friends with for like 15 years, maybe longer now, probably 20 years. And yeah, wow, like over 20 years actually. Um, so this friend of mine, I went to school with, I went to high school with, and um, this friend of mine is not very organized. Okay, not very organized. Kind of all over the map, um, don't want to rely on too many things with this person. But if I am going to make a plan with this friend, something, anything related to social connection, that's his highest personality need. So I can say, hey, let's get some people together and catch up. I'm in town because right now I'm visiting in Toronto. And I can say that. And this friend's going to have it all ready to go, all planned, everything organized. Whereas if you say, I have to run an errand or I need advice or, anything like that, it's going to be really difficult. So we're actually very reliable and we are more consistent. We are more organized. We are more productive when we are in our personality needs. Okay. So you can see how not being aligned with your personality needs is going to make life much more difficult for you. If I had to organize the presentation about accounting, I would probably pull out my hair in the process, right? It would be like so difficult. So the things that we love, they feel natural. And so we're gonna procrastinate less and self-sabotage less. I really don't like the idea of self-sabotage as a whole, to be quite honest, because when we think of self-sabotage, we think of like people think like, oh, I'm just sabotaging myself. We don't like actually sabotage ourselves. It's not like we sit down on like a Monday morning when we're supposed to go to work and we're like, I'm actually going to sabotage myself today. Like it's not like this conscious intentional thing. What we're experiencing as self-sabotage is just our conscious mind and subconscious mind working against each other. Conscious mind says, okay, I'm going to, show up at work. And our subconscious mind says, yeah, but work's not meeting your personality needs. We're going to prioritize our personality needs instead. And what do we know? We know that the conscious mind cannot outwill or overpower the subconscious mind. So you're going to see a lot of resistance. Another few things that you want to know is our emotional responses and how we connect is going to be very related to our personality needs. If we break those down individually, I often give this example, but if I were to go into a park and I were to sit down and somebody was going to talk to me for that entire time I spent at the park, you know, they're going to talk to me about geography or history or things like that. I'm probably going to be like, okay, like I want to leave this conversation soon. I'm ready to go, and try to politely excuse myself as quickly as I can. If somebody sits down on the park bench and they're like talking about, personal growth or human behavior, I'm going to sit down there and be like, oh my gosh, I met the best person today at the park. I'm not going to want to leave the conversation. So it's funny because if you think of like all the applicable contexts of that, things like being on a first date with somebody or how you make new friends. I mean, if you can find people with similar personality needs, you're also going to feel like you naturally connect with people more. I still remember, I don't know if Mars is here today, but I still remember Mars put some meme up, like I think it was like a year ago, maybe, and it was like, oh, the things I tell people in my life. And then it was like the things I tell people at PDS. And it was like this much, much greater amount of things. But like, obviously you're going to see as a general rule, not 100% of the time, but vast majority, that you sit down here, you come into the webinars or the post webinar hangout, and like it's really easy to bond with people because you have similar personality needs. They're going to be around personal growth, emotional connection, romantic relationships. So you're going to feel like there's like a natural sense of ease when it comes to building relationships versus if you go somewhere, whatever the opposite of your personality needs are, and you get, put in that environment, even if you're a generally confident person and generally feel comfortable with people, you might feel a little out of your element, right? A little more like insecure than usual. And so often that can really reflect back to us our personality needs themselves. And as I mentioned earlier, our behavior is just this efficient strategy to get back into our needs, right? I can sit down and say, I'm going to study. And then instead, my behavior is like, nope, we're going to call people or send text messages because our emotional connection bucket is not filled. And our worthiness, our sense of self-worth will be very much connected to how aligned our lives are with our personality needs. And you can imagine, right? Like if I sit down and let's say tomorrow, I always use this example, and an accountant's an amazing job. But if that were to become my job tomorrow, because it's quite out of alignment with my personality needs, what I would see instead is I'm probably not learning outside of work. I'm probably not talking to people about this stuff outside of work. I'm probably like going late to work every day, or trying to avoid or get out of there early or, cut corners on stuff because I'm trying to escape the discomfort of being so out of alignment for my personality needs. And so what happens is we don't grow in the same way in the environments that take away from our personality needs. And then what happens is we go, oh, I'm not good enough. That's why I'm not smart enough. We give it meaning, right? And the reality is sometimes it's just a needs issue. Sometimes we just haven't tapped into our personal space where we're most likely to be successful, we're most likely to feel empowered because we're just living a life out of alignment because we don't have the awareness of these needs that are driving our decisions and behavior and emotions at all times. So now that you have this sort of outline and kind of reminder or refresher about your personality needs and how they form and how they affect us, we're going to unpack competing needs. So we have this friction that we've just been talking about that can be very much caused by our conscious versus subconscious mind. Okay. Conscious mind says, do the accounting work. Subconscious mind says, I care about people. And so we have this like push pull dynamic and it feels really uncomfortable. Or, another example I often use is somebody has, their top needs are social connection, community, security, comfort. And then they set a New Year's resolution, which is like, exercise more, eat healthier. Unless you've got like a health personality need or fitness personality need, you'll see resistance there because your subconscious mind will literally say to you, why would I take time away from social connection? Do things where I feel uncomfortable and insecure. Why would I do that? And so your conscious mind's going to say, push, out will, try so hard. And you're just going to feel all this resistance. And then we go, oh, I'm a failure. Oh, I can't do it. When there's just a way to hack the system, right? Where there's a way to link these things together. But we'll talk about that later on. So we can have this friction that's caused by our conscious and subconscious kind of rubbing up against one another in a way. But we can also have friction when we have needs that are competing with each other. So competing needs, when I use this term, I'm referring to the friction caused by essentially these two competing parts of the self that are motivated for different reasons. Okay. So a really common one, and I've shared this way, way back once before, maybe twice before, where we can have novelty versus security. I had a friend of mine and he was a teacher. This is a long time ago now, like maybe 10 years ago. when I was kind of newer to my practice and doing a lot of this work. And he was like, "Hey, can you help me? I really need your help." And he was generally like a very optimistic person. And we had this discussion about how he was starting to have panic attacks. And I was thinking, like, panic attacks, it doesn't sound like him. And he said, um, we started with like some limiting beliefs. We found some limiting beliefs that were definitely playing a role. But then we got into the needs. And the needs part was so interesting to me because it was one of the first times that I came across competing needs that were so obvious in how they were causing sort of havoc in his life. And he was a teacher, and his top need was security, and then the second top need was novelty. And so what he would do is every year he would be a teacher. He would have his routine all year long. He would get up, exercise, go to work, come home, grade papers, cook dinner, watch TV, go to bed, sort of like repeat the cycle over and over again. And what he would do is he would spend a lot of his school year planning for the summer where he would go backpacking, and he loved, loved, loved to travel. And he would get so excited, and he would plan, and he would put money away, and he would be like, I'm going to stop here, 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 here. And he said to me, each summer he got kind of progressively more anxious. And that also seemed to sort of collide with the fact that each summer his trips became a little bit longer. And he said that what started happening to him is he would be so excited. He'd be like, the school year's out. I'm going. I'm backpacking. And he would land in his location, and he would plan to stay at sort of like whatever hostels came up, and sort of bop around from place to place. And he said he would feel amazing for the first little while. And eventually, as the days passed more and more, he would start getting anxious. And eventually he would start getting these full blown panic attacks. And he was like, what is happening to me? Like, I'm excited about this all year. Why am I panicking? And what was happening is that he had spent all this year filling the bucket of security, that he just went all in on novelty. I'm not going to plan anything. I'm just going to plan which like random locations I'm going to end up in. He didn't have backup plans for where he would stay if he arrived somewhere and a hostel was closed. He didn't have a plan for his budget and how much money he was going to spend. He didn't have, and so what was happening is in his need for novelty, he was totally sacrificing his highest need for security. But he didn't notice that because all year long, he would have his security. So he would be like, he wouldn't even feel like this was something so important to him. And so the anxiety would increase and increase and increase. And mind you, he definitely had some stories in there too, like unsafe core wounds and things like that. But he would get to this like critical mass where his subconscious mind's like trying to communicate with him. And how our subconscious will try to communicate with us is through our emotions. And so I would give all this emotional output of like panic and fear because he was totally ignoring his biggest need. So that is a really good example of a competing need. So what do we do? Well, we said it's probably going to be more simple than you think. We had to question a couple of stories, but then we also went into literally just making a backup plan. Mosey around, go to all the places you want, have the flexibility to try new things. Just know that like within this 10-mile radius, here are the places I can stay at. Here's a couple backup plans. Actually budget things a little bit more so he has this sort of financial security component there too. And all he had to do was really plan those things, have a backup plan so he still had that sense of security. And then he could have novelty and exploration while also knowing that that security was still there. It wasn't list one or the other. And so what can happen is we have these, and his example is extreme because by the time he spoke to me about it, he was already having panic attacks. But most people will see their competing needs cause friction in the area before things become so intense, in the area where you'll feel a sense of frustration, overwhelm, anxiety, sort of like you're being pulled in multiple directions. And that can be something that becomes quite tricky. Another one is sometimes we can have comfort or personal growth, right? We can have a dynamic of like wanting comfort, and comfort's like stay in your comfort zone, don't change. And personal growth is like expand, change, create new things, challenge yourself. So we can have these parts of ourselves that get in this sort of push pull pattern or dynamic. So we're going to talk a lot about what to do. I have a little sort of system that I'll share. Um, I will say that one of the greatest hacks you can spend some time doing, this is something I really try to abide by in my own personal life, is the more your needs line up with each other, the more efficient you can become. And you'll actually see that the more room there is for your bandwidth to be used for things that your conscious mind decides rather than your subconscious mind. Okay. So I spent a lot of time, um, and this was intentional. This was intentional with caution, and it could bite me later. Okay. We'll see. Hopefully not. But I knew when I was starting PDS that it was going to be a busy time. I knew that like it's a startup. I want to build an actual company around this. I want to like have, people coming in every day to do events and social routines and like a ton of support in the community. And I know that, I want to like have a lot of space here. I have a big need for emotional connection. And I know that this is the career for me in terms of like a personal perspective, but I decided early on I wanted it to be kind of like a family run business. So I actually hired at the very beginning when we were small a lot of family and friends. People say don't hire your friends and family. But I was like, well, I know that like I'm going to get alignment. I know that I'm going to have people around me I love working with. I'm excited to see on meetings. I already know that I can hash things out with. We already have good communication and a really good foundation built. So to me, I think I'm going to take that risk. It was sort of a calculated risk. Knock on wood, it's been phenomenal so far. Nothing but gratitude for that whole experience. But there's this element of like, the more you can sort of align your needs in multiple areas, the more your baseline becomes one of fulfillment, right? Like I wake up every day right now and pretty much my baseline is that my top needs are met. Like going into work, my needs are met. Working throughout the day, my needs are met. So, there can be this dynamic of not only how can you design your life so that you are creating a space for your big personality needs, but also how can you hack your time so you're aligning as many needs as possible? You'll see that the result becomes less friction, less resistance, and life will just feel a little bit easier and lighter than the alternative. I can think back to when I was running or not running my practice. Before running my practice, I worked for a place called York Medical Center for a little bit of time, and I didn't have the freedom to talk about and teach what I wanted. I had to follow like a protocol and all these different things. So I felt like my freedom needs were missing. I had people I worked with. There was the one who I talk about in the shadow work example. I worked with this one guy most of the day, and he was not very emotionally connecting, and we weren't really like too close or too friendly, so I wouldn't feel like my emotional connection needs were met too much. A little bit with like people and clients and people I would see, but also I would see people for 30-minute segments there, so I also didn't feel like I had to kind of like follow this protocol. I couldn't like really dig deep into stuff. So I felt like my hands were tied more, and I can think back to that period of time where I felt more resistance, right? I felt like I didn't have freedom needs met. I didn't feel like I had connection needs met in the same way. And so we can sort of observe these things in our own individual life, and we can either design our lives or we can figure out how to pull our needs in, right? We can actually design our lives. One really sort of classic example would be that maybe you're in a position where you um, have all these people you work with and you really like, or sorry, you have all these people in your life that you really like and have these strong connections with, but then maybe you go to a new workplace and you're like, wow, I don't know anybody. And at first that could create a little bit more exhaustion. You have to go into work, that big need that you have for connection isn't met. And it sort of creates this question like, does that mean just really meet with all the people in your life outside of work and double down there? Or it begs the question, can I create that in the workplace? Can I build emotionally connected relationships with my coworkers at this new place? Like, how can I organize that for myself? So we can sort of inject our needs in, or we can move from inwards and try to design our lives with our needs in that external world. And we can do a little bit of both all the time. So you'll see that when we have these competing needs, going back to that idea, we'll see that we have a lot of push-pull patterns. If you're looking for like symptoms of whether or not you have competing needs, it usually feels like frustration, push-pull dynamics, feelings of anxiety, overwhelm can really be a big one. Or another big one that comes up a lot that I actually think doesn't get discussed enough is uncertainty or difficulty making decisions. Sometimes people get really stuck in making decisions because they're being pulled in more than one way. And so that can become really challenging and tricky for that space. Mm. Now, of course, these emotions and reactions can result from multiple things, right? You could also feel overwhelmed because you have no boundaries, or you could also feel anxiety because you're telling yourself negative stories. Like, it's not just one thing. But when we are feeling these things, it's worth making a stop on the train to check, oh, am I having competing needs and not realizing? Okay. Um, so that can be a really big piece. So, competing needs, right? So we have the competing needs dynamic where we have, like, let's say novelty versus security, where you literally have multiple needs pushing against one another. Another really powerful thing to check in on if you're having a lot of symptoms around frustration as it relates to your needs is just belief blocks. Like, all day long, your needs and beliefs are coalescing, right? They're interacting with one another. And what I mean by belief blocks is, like, let's say that you have this huge novelty need that's actually really important to you, but maybe you've developed a belief that says, I'm not good in new situations. I don't know how to meet new people. You could have, I had this client once, and she's a great example of this. Her top needs were for social connection and emotional connection, but she had all these limiting beliefs about herself. She was like, nobody likes me. I'm not likable when you first meet me. It's hard to make friends as an adult. She's all these limiting stories about herself. And so we looked, and, like, she was spending all of her time trying to get her emotional and social connection needs met by, like, watching reruns of a TV show where she felt connected to the characters and reading Twilight books. And it's like, the other thing that we have to realize is that the more we try to get our needs met indirectly, the more energy it will take for how, like, for the lesser degree of fulfillment we will experience. So, like, if you imagine as an analogy that you can have a huge need for emotional connection and social connection, you can go get those needs met by getting your closest 3 or 4 friends around, having really, great conversations with them, spending time, having some laughs. And, like, you're taking your buckets for social and emotional connection, you're literally putting them under the tap, opening the faucet, and that bucket's filling right up really quickly. But if instead you're like that client that I had, and you've got these big belief blocks around social and emotional connection, well, what you're going to see instead is it's like taking this big bucket, putting it under the faucet, and just opening it the tiniest bit so it's just dripping, right? It's not like you're just opening the faucet, letting it run. It's just these little droplets building up. It's going to take a lot of time. And your return on your time investment is going to be quite small compared to if you can just open the faucet in its totality. And so when we have these limiting belief blocks, sometimes they force us to get our needs met in really indirect ways. And that can also cause a lot of friction or exhaustion because we have to do all of these things to get very little return. So you'll see, like, these belief blocks can affect us. And if you have they go both ways, right? Like, if I have a big novelty need met and a big security need, let's say that those are my top two as an example, and which they aren't, but let's pretend. And let's say I really believe skydiving is safe. I might go skydiving, even though I have a big need for security. My beliefs are also going to color the ways in which I get my needs met, right? My beliefs are also going to color, like, how I feel about these different strategies and forms. So we have a system to tackle both. We're going to go into the system. But I want to do some conversational stuff here for a few moments first. I'm going to come back to the steps into the system. Um, I want you to, if you feel comfortable, I want to break it down into 2 parts. So together, let's start by going into the part of um, your, like, specifically going into the part of if you have limiting beliefs about your needs, because we actually want to check in there first before we want to check if we have competing needs as a general rule. So I want you to share, if you feel comfortable in the chat, what your top needs are, and try to ask yourself, like, do I have, hello, everybody. All the faces are here. um, Try to ask yourself, do I have any limiting beliefs about these needs as a whole? Okay. So let's say emotional connection. Oh, I don't feel good enough to make new friends. Or um, let's say, again, novelty. Oh, but new things are unsafe. So try to look for, like, if you have any of these limiting beliefs that are causing you to feel stuck as it relates. Okay, so I'm just going to read this one here, and we can unpack, because I want to go through examples of how we can sort of pluck this apart, and then we'll actually plug it into a system that we have. So Kayla says, I have a high need for emotional and social connection, but also for comfort, safety, and security. I don't have many friends due to various reasons. Betrayal, healing, moving on, moving, etc. And I'm really struggling and needing to meet this. I need to meet new friends and find a community, but I can't seem to get myself there because I'm so shy, self-conscious, fearful. Okay, this is the best example. Thank you for sharing this. So, let's break it down. We can see first, right, your limiting beliefs that are causing you to be likely to have a tough time meeting new people. Okay. You have a bunch of them. You outlined them already very well. So, starting with, I will be betrayed. It's hard to meet new people potentially. Um, or I'm afraid of opening up because I think I might be betrayed. So the first thing you want to do is look for what are all of your blocks that are causing you to feel afraid of meeting new people, okay, at a belief level. So what are all your stories about meeting new people or making new friends? Okay. Dump them all out. Then you want to do reprogramming of those limiting stories or beliefs. Okay. And then let's look at the second part. Then we start looking for competing needs once we have the noise out of the way of the stories. So let's look for the competing needs. Well, emotional and social connection, but comfort, safety, and security. I mean, right there, those are great examples of competing needs. If I'm somebody who needs connection, but you said it yourself, you move to a new place, well, now I have to push myself outside of my comfort zone and zone of safety to make new friends, right? So right away, you're going to feel, you have the first layer of the limiting beliefs that's going to give you a hard time. Then you have the second layer of like you're being pulled in two different directions. You probably sit throughout the day, maybe even have an experience like this. Like this would be like the exact kind of types of things we would see where you're like at work and you're like, oh, I really need to, meet people. I really need to do something social. I'm going to do it this evening. I'm just going to join a meetup group in my area and go. And then you get home and you're like, well, I just want to be comfortable. And it feels a little uncomfortable to do that. And what if I don't meet people? And then you can also have those stories adding on another layer, which are like, well, what if I do meet people and then they betray me? What if I do meet people and then, these negative things happen if I'm vulnerable? So you can see where and it'll be really hard, to be honest. When you're in this situation, it'll feel frustrating and overwhelming, and you'll feel like you're in this kind of push-pull dynamic. So, here's what we can start doing. We get the limiting beliefs out of the way, okay? Dump the limiting beliefs, question the stories, or do reprogramming on the core wounds. I'm not gonna go too far into that because if you've been in PDS for a long time, we talk about those tools nonstop. You know what to do. Then, and if you're new, go into the emotional mastery course. That's one of the best places to start. There will be some really good reprogramming tools in there. Um, Second part is that we then have to decide how can we either make a lot of proactive time for all of our needs so our buckets are always full, and or meaning that you can do both. How can I align these needs and link them up together? Okay, so I'll give you some examples. One example is you get your safety, comfort, and security needs met with great habits on a regular basis. So going back to that analogy of like opening the faucet and having it go really into the bucket, filling it right up. The example there would be like doing things like nervous system regulation, doing things like reprogramming I am unsafe wounds, making sure that you feel safe and secure as a person overall through your internal dialogue, like doing all the things you can to just fill those buckets. So now those buckets are going to feel full when you get home from work and you're thinking about going to the meetup, right? You're going to feel like, you know what, I actually have my needs met for safety and security. You're going to be a little more willing to extend out of your comfort zone. Okay, that's path number one. Path number two, I always prefer because it's more efficient. It's how can I link all of these things together? So it would look like, how can I do things that are going to meet my needs for social and emotional connection in a very comfortable and safe way? What are some examples? To be honest, not to say this is the only way, but like come to PDS, do a social event. Why? Because you can start your social and emotional connection needs met with your camera off, typing in the chat. You can just see, you can just feel it out. You can stick around to the post webinar hangouts. You can join the PDS social events, and you can literally just be like as little interaction as you want or as much interaction as you want. So you can start really small, and then over time it becomes exposure work, right? Over time what you can do is be like, okay, I'm feeling much more comfortable here. I know some people. I'm going to now come on camera and speak with people, and you're expanding out your comfort zone. And as you do that through repetition, your comfort zone will expand. You'll actually feel more comfortable doing that. Then maybe you're suddenly like participating in all these different social events and getting a lot of those needs met. Now, your next step might be like, okay, this is amazing. And I still want an in person friend group. And so then your next thing might be like, okay, I've gotten really comfortable in group dynamics, social interaction dynamics over the past 30 days, let's say at PDS. Now I'm going to go to a meetup group. And what am I going to do that will make me feel safe and comfortable? I'm going to go to a meetup group where I know we have similar personality needs. I'm going to go to a meetup group where I'm well versed on the topic or subject of the meetup. So I'm going to be able to get in there, connect, have an easy time. And I'm going to tell myself, I'm only going to stay for the first 30 minutes. I'm going to tell people in advance when I arrive, okay, I'm only here for 30 minutes so that I can leave early as needed, right? And if I'm loving it, I can stay for longer. But then I'm doing this like intermittent, like excuse me, not intermittent, incremental set of steps where I can expand out my feelings of getting my emotional and social connections needs met, but without having it feel like too unsafe, too overwhelming, too uncomfortable early on. Okay. So like this would be the system that we're essentially going to use. Thank you for sharing that. That was such a good example. And I saw Kathy say, oh my gosh, this is me too. So what we want to do is we've got to get all the have you ever seen those memes? And they're like people's thoughts and they show the thoughts and there's just like this web of, of strings and it's just like so chaotic. It's like we have to like pull the strings out, get it all mapped out nicely. And basically it's going to be get the limiting beliefs or stories out of the way first. Those are going to take up the most real estate and cause the most chaos. Then look for where our competing needs are. And then we have to come up with strategies to either get all of them met extremely proactively or and I say and or because it's ideally you're doing a little bit of both, we can find ways of strategically developing systems in our lives to align them all together so that going to a social event doesn't have to be something that makes you feel insecure and uncomfortable. Um, okay, let's do some more here. So, okay, here's another good one. So, career growth. I actually see a couple. We'll start with these ones. So, we'll say emotional connection and safety. Um, so, emotional connection and safety. That's actually so interesting to me, Leah. So, emotional connection and safety. That shouldn't have to feel like a set of competing needs unless you've got stories that emotional connection is unsafe. So, what are we going to start with? Well, what are your stories for why emotional connection is unsafe? Let's get them out of the way. Okay. Second thing would be, well, how else could these possibly compete? Right. And I would almost want to like hear from you in more detail to hear the context, but maybe it can feel that if you're in a big city, and I think you live in a really big city, if I'm not mistaken, then maybe it feels unsafe to go to places to meet new friends, right? Don't want to be out after dark or, don't want to be in places where you could get sort of lost or stuck. So then we would have to start with, well, how can I get my needs met for emotional connection in safer ways? And that might look like prioritizing brunch over, a 10 p.m. meeting somewhere. It might look like making sure that you are picking locations that make you feel safe and comfortable, right? Or places that are familiar to you. It might look like if you're going to meet new friends or new people or go on a new date, that you vet them properly first, or that you take the time to maybe go in groups at the beginning. So, the more you can really tack those things on together, get the stories out of the way first. I'd be curious to see what your limiting stories are about emotional connection being unsafe, like, oh, I'll be betrayed, or I will be abandoned, or vulnerability is unsafe, or, things like that. But get that stuff out of the way first. And then we can find ways of strategically aligning both sets of our needs together. And that's where we're going to start to see a lot of powerful, powerful momentum. Okay, we'll do another one. Emotional connection, novelty, safety, certainty. Okay, so these are some good competing needs. You probably feel pulled in multiple directions all the time. So emotional connection, novelty, safety, certainty. So I'm just going to put the safety and certainty into its own category. Okay, we're just going to call it security for the sake of it. So we've got the security and we've got the novelty. So just like that example of my friend who's a teacher, you can start by aligning these things, right? You can start by being like, okay, how can I get novelty in safe ways? And examples of this could be things like um, taking on a new hobby, right? In a safe community or environment. Something I always notice, and it was funny because this came up, this is one of the first things that came to mind in last night's webinar, the question from Healing FA that was like, oh, my son is addicted to video games. I always think when I see people playing video games, I'm like, wow, somebody with a huge novelty need, but also a huge security need because you're like getting all the new levels, the new things, the new, experiences in the video game, but like in the safest way possible because you're like sitting in the comfort of like your own home. So you can see these ways that our mind will try to get needs met, and also sometimes connection, right? That was Healing FA's question last night was like the connection part. Oh, my son gets a lot of connection from this, and it's also connection in a safe way, right? Because again, I'm behind a computer screen. I don't like how somebody's speaking to me. I can just leave. I don't have to be too invested or too present. Like there's all those sorts of layers to it that you'll see. So, anyways, I'm not saying that you should start playing video games 24/7 smart swim, but I wouldn't be surprised if you're in that space because your needs are so like that, right? But we could use that as like an example. Where else can you get these needs met for safety and security, but also for meeting new connections, your novelty and your emotional connection? So I would look for hobbies that feel safe to you, community events like taking up like a sport, or even like again, meetup groups, you're going to new places, meeting new people, but make sure that you're structuring it where you're not like going too far away from home or too far out of your comfort zone, or doing things that are too foreign to you that you don't feel well versed in or equipped to handle. And so what you're trying to do is make sure that you're getting these needs for emotional connection and novelty met in really safe and secure ways. And again, that can start with something like this. That could start with being here and getting really comfortable here, meeting new people, making new friends all the time. And then eventually you take those skills where you're like, wow, I've done so much work around this. I can just go out into the world and feel so comfortable doing it. And again, it might be another little incremental stretch because it can feel a little different in person than it might, from here. But that's going to be where if you have all that pre-existing experience, you can build momentum quite quickly. So really, really great shares. Okay, so Lewis says career growth, but then don't feel safe enough to take the opportunities. So that's where you want to be like, okay, well, how can I grow in my career in a way that's still safe? So knowing what I know about you, because you were sharing yesterday, that you felt this sense of you're asked to do these like moves that could be harmful. So for anybody who wasn't here yesterday, Lewis is a professional wrestler, which is a pretty cool job. And so Lewis was saying that you're in this spot where like you're being asked to do these wrestling moves that give you concussions, and then you sort of have this pressure and it makes you feel unsafe. And I would actually say one of the best things that's going to make you feel safe is to feel extremely confident in your boundaries, right? It is possible to grow in your career without saying yes to everything. In fact, I would argue that most people will see more career growth when they're not just saying yes to everything, and more longevity of their career when they're not just saying yes to everything, because less likely to get burnt out or, in your case, injured. So I would say, how can I take opportunities, but also communicate about them and negotiate about them in a way that makes me feel physically safe? I would also say, how can I empower my sense of feeling super safe by getting really good and really comfortable at setting boundaries, which I know you've come a long way on, but then really building that momentum. And then when career growth is important to you, how can you reach out to do networking opportunities with people or connect with people, and do that in a way that isn't even about your physical safety. It's just networking because that feels physically safe. So we want to think of like, how can I align these things in as many ways as possible, while also getting into a spot where I'm empowering the parts of me that are feeling stuck, right? Really, really beautiful share. Okay, so then we have another one. So Emma says deep emotional connection in relationships, but don't feel safe being fully open. It's so interesting. Like we were talking about this yesterday, but I really believe that as long as we only show ourselves with conditions, you'll only feel loved conditionally, right? But the more you show yourself without conditions, the more you're making room for unconditional love in your life. So you can see like this need for deep emotional connection, but don't feel safe being fully open. And so it sounds more like a belief block than competing needs. But it could be the need for safety that's in there as well. So I would say, number one, um, how do we get that stuff out of the way? Well, remove your limiting beliefs about what it means to be open, right? If I am open, then I could be hurt more, or I could be affected more in life. I'm going to share from a personal perspective here too. So, like, emotional connection's always been really big for me as a prior fearful avoidant. I definitely felt like scared to be open. Um, And if I could tell myself, knowing what I know now, what I was feeling during that kind of transition time, I would say a few things. I would say number one, get individuated, because the more I'm not worrying about what people think of me or how they accept me, the more I'm accepting of myself and compassionate and kind towards myself, the less emphasis I'm putting on what happens when I'm open. Like the less I'm outcome based about like if I'm open with somebody and then they do hurt me, I'm like, well, it's fine because I'm good with myself, right? So that would be one good place to start. Um, a second thing is the more you open and you stay open and you get open with many people, if one person does hurt you or goes the wrong way or it doesn't, end well or they're not available for something you're looking for, it's fine because you have like 5 or 6 other amazing people that you do have those connections with. And so when being open becomes more of your resting point, and I don't mean like go be open with somebody that has hurt all of your friends and family, right? Like you could be cautious and vet the person and everything accordingly. But the more you can be mindful of, hey, I'm going to choose to like have being open as more of a lifestyle for me, eventually you'll see that you build a lot of deep connections around and you feel very fulfilled in that area, to the point where then if you are open and somebody does do something hurtful, first of all, if you've worked on a lot of core wounds, you're not going to personalize it as much. Second of all, you've got all these other needs met by people in your life. And so that's going to be where it actually feels really safe to be open, because there's less weight on the outcome. There's less like, it's not like, oh, this is all or nothing. Like, this is going to be that one connection I really build. No, you have a lot of that abundance of that connection in your life as a whole. And obviously that starts in the relationship to self. So that's a really, really beautiful share. And so I'd say work through the stories and the core beliefs and then practice doing that work to feel safe being open. And you can just do it incrementally, right? How do I get safe and meet the need? Let's say it was competing needs where it was emotional connection and security. How do I get safe? I work through my limiting beliefs and then I do exposure work. I don't have to go be super open with everybody at once. It can be something incremental over time. So really, really beautiful share. Okay, Renee says, emotional connection, I am too much. So I see the limiting belief part of it there, the story that you are too much. That sounds like exactly just a belief block. I would work through that limiting belief about yourself. And then I would give yourself permission to be seen and heard without conditions, without trying to play small or keep yourself in a box so you're not too much. And then you'll find that you have this deeper level of acceptance from people around you. And of course, that starts with accepting yourself. So really beautiful share there. Okay, this is a really interesting one too. Someone says, need for novelty, it will make me uncomfortable. So, um, we were talking about this with Cynthia last night. The need for novelty when it makes you uncomfortable is just relevant to your comfort zone. If we imagine here, let's just say, San before doing a lot of healing work. Let's imagine, and I know this about you too, your comfort zone for novelty was probably much smaller. Your comfort zone, if you can imagine, it's like a little circle. It's like this little tiny circle. And then what did you end up doing? At least let's just use like novelty for meeting new people and experiencing new things. You were more anonymous. You didn't share as much. And then over time, I'm sure you probably feel more comfortable now in PDS, in breakout rooms, talking to people than you probably felt when you were more anonymous, camera off, and not even having these conversations. So what happened is that you just did a lot of exposure work on your comfort zone, right? On your comfort in relationship to novelty. So if there's this need for novelty and a need for comfort, always the way will be not to try to make all new things comfortable or to avoid new things and stay comfortable. It will be to slowly expand that comfort zone outwards until it now feels comfortable doing new things or meeting new people. And that's always where we're gonna see the most like bang for your buck, like the most reward for your experience in life. And so that's where I would be like, okay, I would make a list of those new things that you have, like the need for novelty. I'd make a list of like new things you want to try and do. And don't just go like 0 to 60, but do that exposure work slowly but surely over time so that you can get into a position where you're like, oh wow, my comfort zone for what I can experience as novelty feels really expanded, right? Feels like, okay, I can try all sorts of new things. And you can also make a list, right? Of like when we're trying to get those needs met, the different ways you could get that met in different areas of life. Like in career, how could I do it? which you're doing for sure. Financially, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, relationships, like how can I get novelty needs met across all those different areas of life as a whole? So really, really, really great question, or really great share in there. Okay, so Taylor of Life says unable to feel self-confidence in career or relationship. Okay, really interesting. So with this one, um, um, I would look for, okay, what are all of my stories first, right? So we stick to the system. The system is what are all of my limiting beliefs about myself in a career? Do I feel like I'm not good enough? Do I feel like it's not possible for me? One thing that's very interesting, and who was I speaking to about this the other day? I was having a discussion with somebody about this really recently. And we were talking about how when you're in alignment with your personality needs, you're also willing to put yourself through a little more to get there. You're willing to like stretch yourself a little bit differently. Whereas where you're out of alignment with your personality needs, you'll tend to give up a little more quick. And so we're almost willing to deal with hardship better. We're like more resilient when we're in alignment with our personality needs overall. And you'll definitely see that in your own life. And so Taylor, when you say unable to feel confidence in career or relationships, the first thing I hear is like, okay, there's probably some stories, right? I'm not good enough. I'm unworthy. I'm unlovable. And I would be like, hey, let's go in and look at the core wounds. And you can go into the emotional mastery course, Taylor, and look at the core wounds list and see like, what are the core wounds that show up for you in career and relationships? The second thing I actually hear is that because even if you had a lot of core wounds, if you were living your romantic relationships and career life in alignment with your personality needs, even though those core wounds would exist, you wouldn't be unable to feel confidence. You would definitely have moments of confidence, perhaps extended moments of confidence throughout the day that you would then feel get kind of like um penetrated by the core wounds, like almost like the core wound came up and then, it went away and you're back to kind of feeling like a baseline of confidence. Because when we're really in alignment with our needs, we tend to feel a certain degree of confidence that's there. So for me, I hear that you probably have a good bit of limiting beliefs and stories, but I bet that you also are living a life in your career and in your relationships where you're actually out of alignment with your personality needs. And that's why, because the thing that stood out to me in the language you used was unable to feel confidence, which tells me there's pretty extended incongruency between your personality needs and your career and relationship choices here, but also limiting beliefs are probably getting in the way. So I would say step one, get those limiting beliefs. I would go into the emotional mastery course at PDS, reprogram those limiting beliefs, especially that are showing up in career and relationships. Step two, I would do the personality needs course. And I would be like, okay, how can I bring my personality needs into the workplace? And how can I make career decisions for my future and plans for the future that are more likely to be in alignment with my personality needs as a whole? Right. And sometimes it takes time to get there. Like, I can think back to when I was in university. I paid for university by bartending. So I, was in a place where I was not in a career that I liked, but it was, we have to make those sacrifices sometimes. I knew I wanted to work with people. Then I went and worked at York Medical Center. And then I was like, okay, I feel better, but I still don't have my freedom needs. I'm not free to talk about what I want to talk about. I get these 30-minute windows with people. I don't get to like emotionally connect and dig into some of these emotional things from a deeper sort of subconscious personal development space. So, over time, so what I started doing, don't tell the York medical people this, but what I started doing is I started still poking on things that I thought were more relevant, talking about the subconscious a little bit, even though that wasn't the protocol, bringing things in a little bit so I could feel more excited and have a little bit of that practice and share things I thought were more meaningful. And I strayed from the protocol maybe a little bit too much at times, but it helps people. And then over time, I was like, okay, so I'm bringing my needs in. I'm like injecting them into my daily habits. And I made a long-term plan of like, okay, I'm going to go do my own thing instead. And so that was the next thing. Right. So we can have this sort of like harmony where we're able to bring our needs in different forms. And that in a way acts as like a really good band-aid solution. Like it helps a lot and it can help for quite a while. But eventually, if I just was still working at York Medical Center today, I'd probably be pulling my hair out. So, like we can have like this helps and it helps, but it's not the end game. The end game is to also keep making decisions to be able to design your life in alignment with your personality needs. And that's where we're really going to see a much greater degree of fulfillment. Okay, so we'll do like one or two more, and then we'll go into the system. We'll go into like the actual summary of the steps and the structure. So really good share there, Taylor. And then, so Sarah says, top need relationships, limiting beliefs. It will be chaos and it will be painful. So what I would actually advise you to do, there you are. I was like, where did you go? So I would actually advise you to start getting more specific there. Why will it be chaos and be painful? What are all of the stories of why relationships will be chaotic and painful? Because people will abandon me eventually, because people will try to control or trap me, because I will feel unworthy and try to earn my worth too much, because I will feel not good enough. All the typical limiting beliefs that come up in our relationship dynamics. I would really dig into those and I would double down on them. I would be like, okay, I'm going to reprogram all of these limiting beliefs or stories about relationships, or at least question a lot of them. And then I would go into um, this is actually another strategy you can use, because yours is more about having belief blocks that are standing in the way of your need. I would actually also say an interesting exercise would be to look at your other top needs as a whole and be like, how can I make sure that when I'm vetting people that I'm thinking of dating, as many of my needs are met in that process as possible? So as an example, if like comfort or security were up there, maybe you start by FaceTiming people before going on dates. Or if personal growth is a big need, maybe you try to meet people who like on their dating websites literally talk about how they love personal growth. So like you can vet for your needs to make the romantic relationship experience less chaotic and less painful and more likely to succeed. And you can also align as many of your needs as possible as you can. And then, of course, the big one is remove the limiting beliefs by getting more specific on the stories and pulling them out layer by layer. And again, this is where we're taking like our conscious mind. Like, I'm sure your conscious mind's goal is probably to have like a beautiful, fulfilling, harmonious relationship. So, what we're doing is you're getting all of the subconscious mind stuff. I think Sarah disappeared somewhere. But you're getting all of the subconscious mind stuff into alignment, right? I want us to think of like competing needs or belief blocks as being the resistance on the path to just like streamlining your life. And when we can really pin down what those things are and we have the tools to reprogram or to kind of hack the system by aligning these things together, all of a sudden all that resistance or fear that you originally had, you're going to see start to fall away, and it's going to feel easier to do all the things that you really want to do, and it's going to feel easier to get those goals or needs met, and to feel like you can achieve what it is that you really want for your life much more simply. So really, really great share. Okay, so the next one is for Aaron. Aaron says, I have a high need for beauty, especially around my home, but I have a limiting belief that it will take a lot of money and effort to make my home beautiful. So really interesting. So can you 100% know that that's true? Right? Can you really, really for certain know that that is the truth? I would question that. And then part of this is like sometimes this work is also a bit of like a creative brainstorming exercise, which also then becomes, well, how can I make my home beautiful in ways that don't require a tremendous amount of money? Right. And there's endless ways, especially things like, around creativity, around being strategic about where you're buying things from, or about being strategic about how you're creating things. I mean, I'm not sure what your other needs are, Aaron, but I would be so curious to see if there was anything around like creativity or self-expression in there as well, where you could have like sort of like DIY projects and things at home where you can really tailor what you want to your exact needs, by taking the time to plug away and do those things. And the other thing that's so interesting about our personality needs is when we get into a position where we are really clear on our personality needs, and then we have strategies to meet those needs, we'll generally be very productive in those areas. So, like, just as an example, let's say that you have personality needs around beauty, and let's just say, for argument's sake, that you also have personality needs around creativity. We can feel like we're spinning our wheels when we're like, we just have this belief that blocks us, where we're like, oh, I want to make my home really nice, but it's going to take too much money. You can literally just get absolutely stuck. Like, you just fantasize, you'll see your mind tries to get its needs met in other ways by like fantasies of the future. Maybe you fantasize about having enough money to make your home nice. And when instead we can just really equilibrate that story and get it out of the way. Like, I have to have tremendous abundance to make my home beautiful. Is it true? And we can question and equilibrate it. And then we're like, okay, so I can start doing these DIY projects to design my home the way I want it. And I can, be more intentional about where I'm shopping and put a small amount of budget aside to maybe shop like secondhand for items or different things. Once you start coming up with like really good strategies, you'll be shocked at how productive you are. You might be like, "Oh, but I'm not going to do all these DIY projects." And like once the resistance of the limiting belief is out of the way, if you had both creativity and beauty in your top 5 or 6 personality needs ranking, I would see this with clients all the time. They'd come home and the next week they'd be like, I did like 4 DIY projects this week to improve my home. I can't believe it. I haven't been that productive in my spare time for years. And what's happening is it's like the funny thing is your subconscious is yearning for this stuff. Your subconscious like wants to find ways to get its needs met. But when we block it with our beliefs or we block it with competing needs, we just get stuck in this kind of friction gray area, like no man's land. It actually causes a lot of exhaustion. But when we get these things out of the way and then we align ourselves, we'll see a lot of momentum take the place of exhaustion. So really, really great share. And yes, stories are like noise. um, so Emotional connection top needs as Adina. I want too much emotional connection is the limiting belief, and I can never meet people who fit. So we can just be more intentional, right? Like if you're really wanting a lot of emotional connection, I would also encourage you to look for many of your needs. Like for people who are moving to a new city, trying to find new friends, or are going through a lot of change and healing and growth, and they're sitting in a spot where they're like, okay, I'm healing or I'm growing, and um I kind of like I'm disconnecting from people in my life because we have different interests now, and I'm sort of shifting in a new direction. And I want to make new friends who are more aligned. I would highly advise to sit down and be like, well, what do I want in friendships? Like, what are the types of friendships I really want to have and see? And if you can get really clear about what those look like, people with a personal growth need and a learning need, and also people who care about freedom and novelty and want to explore new things. Like when you can get really clear, then all you have to do that's left is reverse engineer the steps. So if I know that I want friendships, for example, with people who like to explore new things and travel or discover things, and they like to learn and they like personal growth, where am I going to find people like that? Right? I just have to figure out where that hub of people exists and then put myself in that arena. Right? So now you're just reverse engineering your dream outcome in this area. And so when we can do that, like when you have this dynamic of like, you'll want to work through the stories, the limiting belief that I want too much emotional connection. Right? Um, and you'll want to, question that story. And then I can never meet people who fit. That's a really disempowering one, because then guess what else is going to happen? You're going to yearn for emotional connection and your subconscious is going to sabotage it, because remember, your subconscious wants to stay in its comfort zone. So it's going to go, I can't meet people who fit. So why bother? And then we're going to keep ourselves stuck. So removing the stories out of the way, then putting ourselves in a position where we're like, okay, what type of emotional connection? Where am I going to find people who really deeply value emotional connection? PDS. Then if I want in-person things, probably meetup groups in my area where it's like also about personal growth or emotional connection, or relationship oriented stuff. And how can I connect in the relationship to myself? So my bucket's always halfway full by being more present with myself, by doing, well, I know you're doing a lot of work with yourself as it is, Adina. But are you present enough with yourself? Is your nervous system regulated enough? Things like that. And as you're pouring into relationship to self for connection and relationships to others in very strategic ways that are more likely to align with multiple of your needs, again, that's where you're going to see, that's where you're going to see so much momentum. I had a laugh because I looked down and then the next story, okay, not many people are willing to function at the level of depth that I like. It just further iterated my point that people in here are going to, like similar things, right? Like people come in here because they want that level of deep emotional connection. So it's such a good place to start. That's such a beautiful share. And again, like, Kay and Adina might want to have a little chat. So you can see, you can see all these different dynamics and how they really exist within here. So I know I'm like over time and I haven't gone back to the system yet. So let me go back here for just a moment. So if we go back here to the competing needs versus the belief blocks, we went through a lot of this, right? Then the how we can have novelty and security. If we want to just the example I gave with my friend, right? Have the plan when you're doing new things, right? Have a plan B, a backup plan, allow for flexibility and novelty, but just know, hey, I can always end up at this hostel or this place. So we can do it so that we're aligning the needs that way. In that case, he's aligning the novelty and security needs together. Another example is we can get really good at meeting security and really good at meeting novelty as proactively as possible. If you have systems in place in your life or on a daily basis, you have, for example, a morning routine that meets your needs and an evening routine that meets your needs, your baseline is to start your day with your buckets full, which is going to make a lot of room. So when I've gone through really busy times in my life, for me, health became more of a personality need the past few years. And like spiritual growth, personal growth are still really big for me. So when I've had really busy times, um, I just make sure I have a baseline where I start my day, I exercise, I meditate, I do a little work on myself to start, or I check in with myself. And then no matter how much I'm pulled in directions that are out of my personality need zone, if I get those buckets really full in the morning, I have a lot more bandwidth for things that are out of my personality need zone. So what I'm thinking of when I'm saying this is like I've had different family members over the past few years who've, knock on wood that that's the end of it, but just who've had illnesses, or a few family members passed away a couple of years ago, and there's been times where it's like, okay, we've got work and we've got all these things on the side where every day after work, I'm kind of going there to be there with family, or driving or running errands, or doing things that are not super, in alignment, except for the emotional connection part, right? But what I learned in those times was that, well, I have to get up a little earlier in the morning. I have to do a really good morning routine where I start my day with my buckets full. And then I'm fully okay with like spending 4 hours driving to pick up prescriptions or drop people off or take people to medical appointments or whatever it is, wait in the waiting room, because my needs are met. My needs are already met. So there's a really good hack for those trickier times in life where we can just proactively be very productive at meeting our needs. And that allows for more bandwidth and things that might otherwise not be as much in alignment, right? For me, like being there for family members was like emotional connection, but it wasn't freedom. It wasn't personal growth. It wasn't, a lot of other things. But if we can get those good habits, it makes everything else much easier. So that becomes very, very important. And then, of course, we talked about the belief blocks. So here's a system. Here's the summary. Okay. I could tackle both. Number one, notice your emotions. Okay. As always, just like we have BTEA, NEA also exists. Our needs lead to emotions, which lead to actions. When we can notice our emotions, we can use the feedback. And then you can ask yourself, well, what are my unmet needs right now? I don't feel good. I feel overwhelmed or anxious or whatever it might be that you're experiencing. What are my unmet needs and what do I need to feel like these needs are met? And then if you identify the needs and you're like, oh, I realize my need for freedom isn't met, or my need for health isn't met, or whatever it might be, then you can ask yourself, well, do I have any limiting beliefs that are blocking me? Right? Remember, that's the noise first that we just want to get out of the way. It can be very confusing if we don't get the limiting beliefs out of the way first. So you want to see, maybe I have a need for um, let's say emotional connection. And then, I'm trying to pick a common one for people, emotional connection, but I believe people won't like me, right? Well, that is going to get in the way of you meeting your needs all the time. So we got to get that out of the way first. Then you want to see, are my needs pulling me in multiple directions? Am I wanting emotional connection, but also wanting comfort and safety? And so these two things are opposing. And so we want to question if there's any belief blocks. Okay. And then we want to create a system to address competing needs. Now, what do I mean? Well, just like we talked about in the chat, just like we ran through all these examples, just like I shared with my friend with the novelty security or personal things with myself, we have two options. And really, I'm just going to highlight these here for a second. These are the two options, right? This is how we address competing needs. We either make really good habits proactively, like I shared, get up earlier in the morning, exercise, meditate, do those things that are meaningful for me. And then my buckets are full all day. I have more bandwidth for other things that may not be as in alignment. And then number two, find ways of creatively aligning them together. So that sort of example that I use where at York Medical Center, I would just share a little bit about the subconscious anyways, kind of inject my needs into there as much as I could. And then outside of that, I was trying to design a life for myself where I felt like my needs were going to be much more in alignment. So another example of this could be if somebody has comfort and personal growth, making time would be like creating space and time for comfort. Maybe every morning or every evening, you have a routine where you read in bed with your PJs on, right? So it's like comfort met to the max. Or you could do so like if we're aligning, or sorry, not aligning, we're making proactive habits for each. You have this bucket or time segmented area of your life where it's just reading bed in my PJs, wrapped in blankets, comfort met to the max. But then you also have time blocked out for exposure reprogramming, right? Where it's a little more uncomfortable because you're stretching your comfort zone. And so you do that every day for 15 minutes, or you do that, once a day at work. So you have this like actual boxed in or segmented, sectioned out time for each of these things. But then on the flip side, if we're aligning, you might do personal growth work from the comfort of your own home, your own bed, and your PJs, listening to the course, or nervous system regulation work, which can bring a lot of comfort when we regulate our nervous system, but can also bring growth and healing because we're moving through maybe being in sympathetic nervous system all the time. So what we're doing is we're seeing where we feel off. We're getting the beliefs out of the way that are blocking us. We're checking to see if we then have competing needs. And if we do, we are either proactively making time for each of these needs separately, or we are aligning them as much as we can through creative strategies or a little bit of both. So that is it for the presentation for today. I have a meeting a little sooner than usual today, so I'm going to dive in there in just a second, but hopefully this makes a whole lot of sense. And it's really powerful when we have, oh, I love this. I exercise while listening to PDS. Yeah, stuff like that is the best, right? Like when you can, that's why I love when people are like sitting outside, yeah, cooking, um, all the things that we can do. I'll say one last thing, and then I have to go because I'm already a little late to this meeting, but um, um, one other thing that we can do too is the things that we don't like, we can align with things that we do like. If you're seeing, like for me, I've just really never liked cleaning. It's just not my favorite thing in the world. I think because as a child, my parents would always push me to clean, and I already had like a big I am trapped wound. So I think my subconscious associates cleaning with being trapped. Um, so what I do is when I have to clean, you bet I am like listening to podcasts. I'm doing things that are like filling as many other buckets as I possibly can. I'll try to get my husband to clean with me at the same time, like get all the needs met while cleaning, so that it doesn't feel like all this resistance. So the more we can do those things too, we can really hack the system.